West Virginia, 2008. A cold case finally solved after years of torment, mystery, and silence. The victim, Aiden Christopher Bell, just 6 years old. A bright-eyed first grader with a backpack full of crayons and dreams. One afternoon, he vanished from a quiet suburban neighborhood. Hours later, his tiny bicycle was found alone near the edge of the woods. No sign of Aiden. The community searched. The police followed every lead, but the trail grew cold, and darker secrets lingered just beneath the surface. Now, over a decade later, a stunning DNA breakthrough leads to an arrest that no one saw coming, not even the victim's family. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. In 2008, nestled in the quiet embrace of the Appalachian Mountains, the town of Elkins, West Virginia, was the kind of place people moved to in search of peace. Surrounded by dense forests, winding roads, and clapboard homes with flower beds out front, Elkins was more than a town. It was a tightly woven community where neighbors weren't just acquaintances, they were family. And for Melissa Bell, a devoted single mother, it was the only home she wanted for her 6-year-old son, Aiden Christopher Bell. Aiden was the kind of child who lit up any room he walked into. With tousled brown hair and a curious gaze that always seemed to be asking the next big question, he brought joy not only to Melissa, but to everyone who crossed his path. He was obsessed with dinosaurs, often seen with a plastic T-Rex clutched in one hand and a juice box in the other. At school, teachers called him the little gentleman, polite, bright, and eager to learn. He always raised his hand, never interrupted, and made sure no one sat alone during lunch. Melissa juggled 2 jobs at the local urgent care clinic but never missed bedtime stories. Their small house on Poplar Street had walls covered with Aiden's drawings, mostly of prehistoric creatures, flying cars, and smiling suns. It wasn't a wealthy life, but it was full of love. In the evenings, Aiden would build sprawling Lego towns across the living room rug, narrating tales of dinosaur cities and alien invasions to his tired but smiling mom. Summer nights were reserved for fireflies, which Aiden lovingly caught and released like magical secrets sent from the stars. The town watched him grow with pride. Mrs. Hanley from next door always slipped him an extra cookie. Mr. Rowan, the mailman, let Aiden help push letters through the slots on his weekend rounds. In Elkins, people looked out for one another. It was the kind of place where porch lights stayed on late, and laughter echoed down the street during block parties. Because of this trust, Melissa never thought twice about letting Aiden ride his bike along the sidewalk or walk to the corner store for a piece of bubble gum. It was safe here, or so everyone believed. That belief would soon be broken in the most devastating way. Beneath Elkins' picturesque charm and old-town rhythm, something darker simmered, something no one saw coming. There were no warnings, no threats, just a quiet predator hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting. For 6 years, Aiden Bell had lived a life marked by innocence, routine, and love. He was surrounded by people who adored him, in a place that seemed built to protect him. He was a child who trusted the world around him, a trust that should never have been betrayed. But on one overcast October afternoon, with leaves crunching under bicycle tires and the sun beginning its descent behind the hills, Aiden disappeared without a sound. A moment that began like any other would end in heartbreak, confusion, and a desperate search for answers that would span years. The quiet streets of Elkins would never be the same. Porch lights that once glowed with warmth now flickered with worry. Neighbors who once smiled freely now watched strangers with suspicion. And as the wind picked up that evening, rustling the trees along Poplar Street, a terrible question began to form in the hearts of everyone who knew Aiden. What happened to the little boy who never came home? October 14, 2008, began like any other Tuesday in Elkins, West Virginia. The morning had been chilly, a crispness in the air that hinted at the coming winter. Children rushed out of their homes wrapped in light jackets, lunchboxes swinging from their arms as school buses rolled through the sleepy streets. For 6-year-old Aiden Bell, it was picture day at school. His mom had combed his hair neatly, packed his favorite sandwich, and reminded him to smile big for the camera. He came home just after 3 p.m., full of energy and stories. His mother, Melissa, was finishing up dinner prep, spaghetti, his favorite. Aiden dropped his backpack, kicked off his sneakers, and asked with that pleading look only kids have, "Can I ride my bike? Just for a little while?" The sun was starting to dip below the hills, casting a warm orange glow that danced through the amber-colored leaves lining Poplar Street. Melissa hesitated. It would be dark soon. But this was Elkins, a place where parents still believed in the safety of their streets. She agreed, telling him to stay close and be back by 6. At 5:43 p.m., a neighbor remembered seeing Aiden pedaling toward the edge of the block, his little legs working hard to climb the slight hill. He waved, smiling, his helmet slightly askew. That was the last time anyone saw him. By 6:10 p.m., dinner was ready, and Melissa stepped outside to call him in. The sky had shifted into that purplish hue that comes just before dusk. She called once, then twice, but there was no reply. The street was silent, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower and the wind rustling the leaves. Panic didn't set in immediately. Melissa thought maybe he'd gone to see a neighbor. She checked the yard, the sidewalk, then the corner store. Still nothing. She began knocking on doors, her voice louder, more desperate with each house. Then, at the edge of the woods that bordered the neighborhood, she saw it, Aiden's small red bicycle, propped against a tree as if waiting for him to return. His helmet hung from one of the handlebars. It wasn't lying discarded. It wasn't damaged. It was simply there, untouched. Melissa's scream echoed across the street. Within minutes, local police arrived. By 7 p.m., K-9 units were deployed. Neighbors grabbed flashlights and fanned out through the neighborhood and into the dense woods. The search lasted deep into the night. Volunteers, police officers, and even complete strangers trudged through thick brush and muddy trails, calling his name into the darkness. But there were no signs of a struggle. No discarded clothing. No footprints that led anywhere definitive. Just silence. A hollow, oppressive kind of silence that seemed to swallow the light. The next morning, news of Aiden's disappearance spread like wildfire. Flyers were printed. The local news issued a missing child alert. The community, once so confident in its safety, now held its breath. Doors were locked. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter. And Melissa, sleepless, trembling, inconsolable, replayed every moment of that afternoon in her head, searching for something she might have missed. For investigators, the case was baffling. Broad daylight, a quiet street, a well-known child. No witnesses, no sounds, just a boy who vanished in the span of less than 30 minutes. As hours turned into days and theories began to swirl, one truth remained chillingly clear. Someone had taken Aiden Bell, and they'd done it without leaving a trace. In the early morning light of October 16, 2008, the mist still clung to the dense treetops of Monongahela National Forest. It was the kind of morning that blanketed the forest in silence, broken only by the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. Hiker Daniel Forsyth, a local school teacher out for a routine solo trek, was following a lesser-known trail near the forest's southern edge, about 5.5 miles from Poplar Street in Elkins. He had taken that path dozens of times before, but something caught his eye that morning. Tucked beneath a thicket of underbrush and half-buried beneath pine needles was a tiny shoe, a light-up sneaker, smeared with dirt, the kind you'd only see on a small child. Forsyth stopped cold. A chill passed over him, and he reached for his phone with trembling hands. By 9:15 a.m., sheriff's deputies had secured the area. By 10 shire, the entire section of forest was swarming with search crews. Authorities formed a tight search grid, combing the surrounding woods with precision. Dogs were brought back in. Forensic specialists walked the terrain slowly, scanning for any disturbance in the soil, any snapped branch, any clue. The air grew heavy with dread. Just before dusk, one of the cadaver dogs began to bark frantically near a mound partially covered with moss and a few loose stones. Investigators moved in quickly and began to gently excavate the area. What they uncovered left even the most seasoned officers visibly shaken. A shallow grave roughly 3 feet deep. Inside, wrapped tightly in a faded, torn bedsheet, was the small body of a child. The coroner would later confirm the worst. It was Aiden Christopher Bell. The news hit Elkins like a thunderclap. Word spread faster than any press release. By nightfall, the town was in collective mourning. Candlelight vigils were hastily organized. Residents who had never met Aiden wept in their kitchens, clinging to their children a little tighter that night. Back at the scene, investigators moved methodically. The area around the grave was cordoned off and examined inch by inch. There were no drag marks, no signs of a vehicle having come through the forest, no cigarette butts, no tire impressions. The ground around the site seemed undisturbed, almost too clean, as if whoever had buried Aiden had taken great care not to leave a trace. The sheet he was wrapped in bore no obvious markings. Forensics would later detect a faint trace of what appeared to be motor oil, but its origin was unclear. Strangely, Aiden's body showed no immediate signs of blunt force or stab wounds. There were no ligature marks, no signs of a struggle. The coroner's preliminary report listed the cause of death as undetermined, though further testing was underway. For police, the absence of evidence was maddening. They had a body, but no fingerprints, no DNA, no trail to follow. The scene was pristine, almost calculated. The way Aiden had been placed in the earth, not hastily dumped but wrapped, hidden, sent a chilling message. This was not the act of a panicked stranger. It felt personal, thoughtful in the most twisted way, and that, more than anything, disturbed the investigators on site. Melissa Bell was escorted to the sheriff's office and informed of the discovery. Her scream echoed down the hallway. Friends say she collapsed inconsolable, clutching Aiden's favorite drawing from the fridge, a picture of a T-Rex with a smiley face. The town had braced for bad news. But nothing could prepare them for this. They had found Aiden, but what they uncovered in that forest didn't offer answers, only more questions. Why was he buried with such care, and who wanted him hidden forever? In the days following the discovery of Aiden Bell's body, the town of Elkins found itself suspended in a kind of collective grief, one laced with dread and confusion. The innocence that once defined the quiet West Virginia town had been shattered. Porch lights that once symbolized neighborly warmth now burned with quiet vigilance. Children were no longer allowed to play unattended, and every unfamiliar car earned a second glance. The Randolph County Sheriff's Department launched a full-scale investigation. A task force of detectives, crime scene analysts, and child abduction experts was assembled. The first step canvassed the neighborhood. Every house within a mile radius of Poplar Street was visited. Residents were asked about their routines, any visitors, anything unusual. Dozens of statements were collected, cross-referenced, and archived. Registered sex offenders in the surrounding counties were tracked down and interviewed. Their alibis scrutinized, their pasts dissected. One man, a transient with a record from another state, was briefly considered a person of interest after he was spotted near the wooded trails days before Aiden's disappearance. But a time-stamped receipt from a diner hours away placed him out of town during the critical window. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from gas stations, convenience stores, and traffic lights across town. They combed through hundreds of hours of grainy tapes looking for a familiar face, a suspicious vehicle, anything. They found footage of Aiden walking home from school with his mother earlier that week. But nothing on the day of his disappearance. No car fleeing the area, no stranger lingering in the shadows. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen a dark pickup truck idling near the woods earlier in the week. Others swore they noticed a stranger near the elementary school in the days before Aiden vanished. A man in his 20s, wearing a ball cap and watching the playground from a distance. Police investigated each tip. They spoke to school staff. They reviewed sign-in logs. But no one recalled anyone suspicious entering school grounds. By November, over a month had passed. Leads had dried up. Frustration boiled beneath the surface. Residents wanted answers, and Melissa Bell, more than anyone, needed them. She made her first public plea on local television, seated beside the sheriff. Her voice trembled, but her message was clear. Someone out there knows what happened to my son. Please come forward. That night, the vigil outside the Bell home drew nearly 200 people. Flickering candles lit up the street. Children held signs that read, "Justice for Aiden." Prayers were whispered. But behind every bowed head, there was fear. Fear that a killer was still among them. Search teams returned to the forest, retracing their steps, hoping to find something they missed. Forensic teams retested the few pieces of evidence they had. The sheet Aiden had been wrapped in, the bike, the shoe. But none yielded new information. With no motive, no weapon, and no clear suspect, the case became a web of possibilities and false starts. Internally, investigators began to explore darker theories. Was this truly the work of a stranger? Or could the culprit be someone who knew the family? someone who had blended into the community unnoticed. Melissa was questioned again, her past relationships examined. Family members were asked about conflicts. It was standard protocol, but it reopened fresh wounds. As the holiday season approached, the decorations on Poplar Street remained in boxes. No lights, no laughter, just silence and the lingering question on everyone's mind. What if the person who did this was still walking among them, hiding in plain sight? By the end of 2009, the energy that had once pulsed through the investigation into Aiden Bell's death had begun to fade. What started as an all-hands-on-deck effort slowly unraveled under the weight of silence and dead ends. Leads dried up. Forensic evidence, once believed to hold the key to solving the case, yielded nothing conclusive. The bedsheet Aiden had been wrapped in revealed no viable DNA. The oil trace found on it couldn't be linked to anyone, and the fabric scrap pulled from near the shallow grave, initially promising, offered no matches in national databases. Detectives were reassigned to newer cases. The specially formed task force was reduced to a skeleton team. Media coverage waned, replaced by newer headlines, fresher tragedies. For the world, Aiden's name slowly faded into memory. But not for Melissa Bell. For her, time had stopped the moment she found her son's bicycle leaning against that tree, while the rest of the world ticked forward. Melissa remained anchored in that autumn day. She refused to let Aiden become just another cold case. Her grief evolved into determination, a need to be louder than the silence swallowing her son's story. She began attending every town hall, every community board meeting. She kept a binder of names, notes, timelines, everything the police had shared and more. Melissa wrote to state representatives, pleaded with law enforcement, and petitioned for renewed attention to Aiden's file. She became a fixture in Elkins, not just as the grieving mother, but as a voice for every parent who never got closure. Her home, once filled with bedtime stories and laughter, became a quiet sanctuary of memory. Aiden's drawings remained on the fridge, some now faded at the edges. His bedroom stayed untouched, dinosaur bedsheets still neatly tucked, favorite books lined on the shelf, the nightlight still plugged in. His shoes sat by the front door, exactly where he had left them. The silence in the house was deafening. Birthdays passed with unlit candles. Christmases came and went without laughter. Melissa would hang one ornament, Aiden's favorite, a felt dinosaur he made in kindergarten. It was the only decoration she allowed. Every year she stood by his grave reading him the letters she wrote weekly, folded carefully and placed in a box next to the headstone. In 2016, 8 years after the murder, the case was officially archived. Aiden Bell's file was boxed, labeled, and placed on a shelf alongside thousands of other unsolved crimes across America. To law enforcement, it was a painful reality. Sometimes justice doesn't come, but Melissa refused to accept that. She organized a vigil that year, smaller than the first, but just as heartfelt. Holding a candle in the town square, she made a promise aloud. "I won't let this go. Not until I know who did this to my baby." Unknown to her, far away from Poplar Street, change was stirring. A wave of scientific advancement was beginning to reshape criminal investigations. Across the country, new cold case units were being formed. DNA technology was evolving, shifting from the reliance on direct matches to the power of familial genealogy, the ability to build family trees from partial profiles. Aiden's case, once silent, was now sitting quietly in a database waiting for the right match, waiting for the right eyes to look again. And so, while Elkins slept, while Melissa clung to hope, and while the rest of the world had seemingly forgotten, the groundwork was quietly being laid for a second chance at justice. By 2022, the state of West Virginia had begun to confront a painful truth. Dozens of unsolved child murder cases, like Aiden Bell's, had sat dormant for too long. In response, the Department of Public Safety launched a dedicated cold case and child victim unit, a small but focused task force of seasoned investigators, forensic analysts, and DNA specialists. Their mission was singular: bring resolution to the families who had waited too long for justice. Among the first batch of files pulled from storage was the case of Aiden Christopher Bell. 14 years had passed since the 6-year-old vanished from his neighborhood in Elkins and was later found buried in Monongahela National Forest. The case had baffled investigators. No solid leads, no conclusive evidence, no suspect ever charged. But now the case would benefit from something it never had before: cutting-edge forensic technology. At the State Crime Lab in Charleston, forensic biologist Aaron Malik was assigned to reprocess the limited evidence from the 2008 investigation. Much of the material had degraded with time, but one item stood out: a torn piece of fabric recovered from the burial site. Back in 2008, it had been deemed unusable due to surface contamination, likely from the elements. But in 2022, thanks to a revolutionary DNA recovery technique called MPS, massively parallel sequencing, the lab was able to extract a usable partial DNA profile from the trace biological material embedded in the fibers. It was male. The sample was uploaded into CODIS, the national database of known offenders and arrestees, but no match came back. The profile didn't belong to anyone currently in the system. That could have been the end, but this time, the team wasn't looking for a direct match. They had another tool in their arsenal: genetic genealogy. Through partnership with a private lab that specialized in DNA-based family tree construction, the sample was run through public ancestry databases. Within 2 weeks, the system began to generate distant familial matches, third and fourth cousins spread across several counties in Appalachia. A genealogist was brought in to build out a family tree, using old census records, obituaries, and marriage certificates to trace the connections. What they found was a family line with roots in Randolph County, the very area where Aiden had disappeared. Names started surfacing. Cross-checking ages, addresses, and juvenile records eventually led investigators to one man: Lucas Wayne Carver. Lucas was now 32 and living out of state. But in 2008, he was a 17-year-old resident of Elkins, living just a few blocks from Poplar Street. At the time, he had no adult criminal record, but investigators uncovered a sealed juvenile case from 2007, assault and trespassing. He had been quietly relocated to live with extended family in Ohio shortly after Aiden's death. The match wasn't perfect. The DNA was partial, not definitive. But the genetic connection, combined with his proximity, sealed juvenile past, and sudden departure from Elkins, made him a person of significant interest. Melissa Bell was contacted privately. Authorities informed her that progress had been made, but they were cautious with details. They had been here before and following what seemed like a real lead, only to face another wall. This time they tempered hope with scrutiny. Investigators moved carefully. They placed Carver under discreet surveillance, obtained a warrant for discarded DNA, and sent the fresh sample to the lab for comparison. All that was left was the result. And as they waited, holding their breath, one question echoed louder than any other. Could this man, a name no one had spoken in years, really be the one who stole Aiden's life? On a cold morning in February 2024, in a quiet suburb outside Cincinnati, Ohio, federal marshals and detectives from West Virginia knocked on the door of a modest 2-story home. Lucas Wayne Carver, 32 years old, answered in pajama pants and a faded t-shirt. He looked surprised but not alarmed, until the officers stepped forward and placed him in handcuffs. "You're being arrested in connection with the 2008 murder of Aiden Christopher Bell," one officer said. 16 years had passed since Aiden's death. Carver hadn't been on anyone's radar in over a decade. But now, thanks to a discarded coffee cup he left in a public trash bin weeks earlier, investigators had a full DNA sample, one that matched the partial profile found on the fabric near Aiden's shallow grave. The arrest warrant had been signed the night before. The news broke across West Virginia within hours. "Cold case solved, arrest made in Aiden Bell murder," read the headlines. Elkins, once numbed by years of silence, and was jolted awake. The name Lucas Carver resurfaced like a ghost. People remembered him. He had been that quiet teenager with dark eyes and a shy smile. Kept mostly to himself. Lived 2 streets over from the Bell residence. He wasn't a close friend of the family, but he'd occasionally ride his bike past Aiden's house, sometimes waving. Melissa Bell recalled one specific afternoon when Aiden had come home excited because the older boy down the street helped fix my chain. That boy, it now seemed, had never left Aiden's story. He had only gone unnoticed. The details of his past painted a disturbing picture. At 17, Lucas had been arrested for trespassing and assault after an incident involving a younger cousin. The records had been sealed due to his age, but investigators obtained a court order to unseal them following the DNA match. Shortly after Aiden's funeral in 2008, Carver abruptly moved in with relatives in Ohio. At the time, it had seemed unremarkable, a teenager starting over. But now, in hindsight, the timing raised alarm bells. Melissa Bell was at home when she got the call. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "We've made an arrest, Melissa." "It's him." She dropped the phone. Her legs buckled beneath her. A neighbor who was visiting caught her before she hit the floor. Moments later, she whispered through tears, "I remember him. I remember his face." The community reaction was a mix of shock, grief, and anger. How could someone so familiar, someone who lived so close, have been overlooked? How had the town missed the signs? Sheriff David Lantry, who had been a young deputy on the original case, addressed the public during a press conference. "This arrest is the result of persistence, science, and a mother who never gave up," he said. "We know this doesn't undo the past, but it's a step toward accountability." As Carver was extradited back to West Virginia, questions swirled. He remained mostly silent during initial interrogations, asking for a lawyer. His mugshot, older, heavier, eyes downcast, spread across social media, reigniting memories in anyone who had ever walked Poplar Street. Melissa Bell stood outside the courthouse days later, clutching a framed photo of Aiden. "His voice may have been silenced," she said to reporters, "but today the world finally heard him." Still, the hardest part was yet to come. With trial preparations underway, both prosecutors and the public faced the looming challenge of turning an arrest into a conviction. Would the evidence be enough? Would justice finally be served? On July 7, 2025, the trial of Lucas Wayne Carver began in the Randolph County Courthouse. 16 years after Aiden Bell was taken from his family and his community, the man now accused of that crime stood before a judge and jury in the very town he once called home. The small courtroom, lined with wooden benches and weathered walls, filled quickly with residents, journalists, and law enforcement officers who had followed the case for over a decade. Carver entered in a gray suit, his hair shorter than in his mugshot, expression unreadable. The prosecution opened with a simple, powerful statement. "This is the story of a child lost and a killer hidden in plain sight." Prosecutor Diane Holcomb meticulously laid out the timeline. She described the reopening of the case, the genetic genealogy that led to Carver, and the DNA recovered from the fabric found at Aiden's burial site. Expert witnesses from the state crime lab explained how the degraded DNA was recovered and matched to Carver through a series of genetic links and ultimately confirmed through a direct sample. Neighbors testified to Carver's presence in the area at the time of the crime. One recalled seeing him near the woods days before Aiden vanished. Another mentioned that he had been unusually withdrawn after the funeral, leaving town quietly without a goodbye. The defense countered with a narrative of mistaken identity. They argued that the DNA could have been deposited days before the murder, that Carver had no known history of violence since his sealed juvenile offense, and no discernible motive. They emphasized the lack of direct physical evidence linking him to the moment of Aiden's death. No eyewitnesses, no weapon, no confession. They suggested he had been a neighborhood teenager who may have come into contact with the sheet long before it became evidence. But the trial's emotional center came on the 8th day, when Melissa Bell took the stand. Wearing a simple black dress and holding a tissue tightly in her hand, she spoke softly but with unwavering resolve. She described Aiden's joy, his kindness, and his quirks. How he would make up songs about dinosaurs and how he once gave away his favorite toy to cheer up a friend. She recounted the moment she found his bike, the sleepless nights, the birthdays spent at his grave. The courtroom was silent, many wiping away tears. "You don't move on from losing a child," she said. "You just learn to carry the weight." Her testimony cut through the technicalities. It reminded everyone in that courtroom what the trial was truly about. A little boy who never got to grow up. After 3 weeks of proceedings, the jury deliberated for just under 9 hours. On July 28, 2025, they returned with their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Lucas Carver showed little emotion as the sentence was read. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted. Justice had at last found its voice, but alongside the relief was a deeper ache. The betrayal of knowing that the person responsible had once stood so close, had once helped fix Aiden's bike, had blended in as a neighbor, a classmate, a familiar face. The town of Elkins had gained closure, but it had also lost something more abstract, its sense of innocence, of trust in the known. And as the courtroom doors closed and the crowds dispersed, one question lingered in the air. How do you move forward when the monster wore the face of someone you thought you knew? Aiden Christopher Bell's life may have ended far too soon, but the echoes of his story reached far beyond the tragedy. His case, once buried in the silence of a cold file drawer, became a catalyst for systemic change across West Virginia and beyond. In the aftermath of Lucas Carver's conviction, law enforcement officials and state legislators took a hard look at the gaps that had allowed Aiden's killer to go undetected for so long. It became clear that limited forensic funding, outdated DNA testing protocols, and insufficient data sharing between counties had delayed justice for countless families like the Bells. Melissa Bell, once known only as a grieving mother, transformed into a powerful advocate. She spoke before the West Virginia State Senate in early 2026, urging lawmakers to create policy that would prevent other families from enduring what she had. Her voice, calm but resolute, carried the weight of every parent whose child's name had faded from headlines too soon. Her efforts helped usher in the West Virginia Cold Case Justice Act of 2026, a groundbreaking piece of legislation that mandated annual reviews of unsolved child homicide cases, provided funding for advanced forensic testing, and expanded access to genetic genealogy services. The law also required police departments to maintain cold case units or partner with state-level resources if they lacked funding. For Melissa, it was more than legislation. It was a promise kept to Aiden. Alongside legal reform, Melissa founded the Aiden Bell Memorial Foundation, a nonprofit that awards scholarships to high school seniors pursuing degrees in child psychology, forensic science, or criminal justice. The first recipient was a young woman from Elkins High School, someone who had once walked the same halls Aiden might have had he lived. His former elementary school honored him in its own way. A quiet corner of the school library now houses Aiden's nook, filled with books about dinosaurs, outer space, and colorful adventures. His original drawings, recovered from his home, were framed and placed on the walls. One shows a smiling T-Rex holding hands with a stick figure boy. Another depicts a rocket ship with the words, "I want to go to the moon someday." Every year on October 14th, the school holds a day of kindness in his name. Students are encouraged to do something thoughtful for others, just as Aiden once did with such ease. His name, once spoken in mourning, is now spoken in remembrance, in inspiration. Melissa began speaking at criminal justice conferences, sharing her family's story with police cadets, forensic analysts, and policy leaders. Her message was always the same. Every cold case is still a living story waiting for someone to listen. Her words resonated. Across the country, cold case units began revisiting evidence with fresh eyes. Aiden's story became a case study at universities and a symbol in state campaigns for DNA backlog reform. Yet through all of this, the laws, the scholarship, the public appearances, Melissa kept one part of her world untouched: Aiden's bedroom. The dinosaur bedding, the Lego towers, the nightlight by the wall, all remained frozen in time. It wasn't a refusal to let go. It was her way of ensuring that Aiden's presence never faded. In interviews, Melissa often says, "He didn't just disappear. He left behind a legacy that will protect others. That's how he lives on. And in the hearts of the people of Elkins, in the policies rewritten in his name, in the lives shaped by the foundation that bears his memory, Aiden Bell is not forgotten. Because behind every cold case isn't just evidence, and it's a child, a family, a future. And sometimes from the darkest silence comes a voice that changes everything." Aiden Christopher Bell was not just a statistic in a database or a file gathering dust on a forgotten shelf. He was a 6-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs, made rocket ship drawings, and waved at neighbors every time he rode his bike. His laugh filled the small home he shared with his mother, Melissa, and his dreams were no different from any other child's: big, bright, and unburdened. That innocence was stolen in October 2008, and for more than a decade, His case stood as a chilling reminder of how quickly life can change and how slowly justice can arrive. His disappearance shattered the sense of safety in Elkins, West Virginia. The investigation stalled, and the years passed in painful silence. But Aiden's story never truly went cold. Not in the heart of his mother and not in the minds of the few who refused to give up. In 2024, the arrest of Lucas Wayne Carver, linked through groundbreaking DNA technology, proved that no matter how much time passes, the truth can still emerge from the shadows. But this case was more than one arrest. It ignited change. It reformed policy. It gave rise to voices like Melissa Bell's, voices that now champion justice for forgotten children across the country. Aiden's life may have been brief, but his legacy is enduring. He became the reason a system got better, the reason other children might now be saved, and the reason why no cold case should ever be left behind. If you believe every child deserves to be remembered, to be fought for, then share Aiden's story. Keep his name alive. Because justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied, and Aiden Bell will never be forgotten.